Hi, welcome back. In this segment, we are going to talk about Wadhwani Purdue Mentoring Framework. For this course, we have specifically developed this framework so that we can organize the content which you can absorb much easier. Wadhwani Purdue Mentor Development Framework is a time-bound, knowledge-based paradigm that delivers measurable outcome. So let's step back and think about it. So it is a mentor development framework, the framework that will enable you to really think through what will it take for you to become a very effective mentor. And it has to be done in a time-bound manner, which means that every engagement has to have a very specific start time and an end time. And it is knowledge-based, meaning thereby we would like to develop core knowledge and core skill sets that will be consistent across different projects and different engagements. And it is a paradigm, which means that it is a way to think. It is a way to absorb what is going on. And at the end of it, it has to be measurable. The outcome must be measured. So this is the key components of our framework, that it is time-bound, it is knowledge and skill-based, and it delivers measurable outcome. So let's look at it, how it will look like. So the most important thing is, what are those core skills which every mentor should have? These skills would relate to some of the key components: how you interact with your mentee, how do you communicate with them, how often you give feedback. Then the next thing is knowledge. These are some very specific knowledge. These knowledge has to be with the mentor themselves, about the mentee, the processes, as well as the business. Then the third component of this framework is the developmental stage. The startups are at different developmental stage. Some of them are an early stage company, which means they're going through ideation and validation, or they can be in a growth phase where they are executing their business plan. And then comes the process. The process of mentoring itself, that how do you engage a mentee? And that has to have some very specific process knowledge, that how do you walk through or go through these process of engaging a mentee. And then the process has to be time-bound, which means that it has to have a very specific start date and very specific end date. So when you are executing your engagement, then there has to be a continuous monitoring and evaluation. And once that is done, then you go through the next phase. So the key components, again, for the framework is that you develop certain skills and knowledge, then you engage with startups which are in different developmental stages, and then you go through the process of mentoring. And as you are going through the process of mentoring, which is time-bound, and then you are continuously monitoring and evaluating how the relationship is progressing. So let's look at it in a little bit more details. So what constitute mentoring skills? Some of the components of mentoring skills is personal. Personal is all about emotional IQ. As we know that entrepreneurship is a journey, and in that journey, a founder or an entrepreneur will go through a lot of ups and downs in the business cycle. Some of the times he will be highly elated. Other times he will be down in dumps. So as a mentor, how do you deal with each individual who have a very different way of coping with different situations? So that is the personal level. The next thing is interpersonal. In interpersonal, what it means is that how do you, as a mentor, relate with the mentee? How do you communicate with your mentee? How do you give feedback? So when do you have to be tough on them? When do you have to be a cheerleader? When do you have to be a philosopher? When do you have to be someone to lend your shoulder for them to cry on? So there are a lot of different roles which you have to play, and you cannot just deal with all situations in the same way. You have to deal with each situation very differently. Then comes the organization skills. So it is very important that you understand your mentee and organize your engagement accordingly. So this is all about, how often you're going to meet, where you're going to meet, so how do you develop the agenda for the meetings? So how often do you give feedback? So how do you monitor the engagement? How do you give, assess how the situations are going? So it is all about organization of your relationship. And finally, it is all about learning. So both of you are learning. So you're learning about the mentee is learning about you. So you have differing styles. So you are adjusting to each other. Then as the mentee is going through different phases of the business development, then what you are doing is you are learning how the mentee is reacting to different situations. So you have to adjust your styles to meet the styles of the mentee. And remember, when you are developing these skills, it is not about the business, it is about the mentee. And so how do you look at things where you are focusing on the mentee more than what you are focusing on your mentee's business? So that is what learning is, and learning is very important because in this particular engagement, both of you are going to learn together. The next aspect is mentoring knowledge. And so this is a very critical thing. So there are a lot of different aspects and business situations as well as interpersonal situations where you will have to draw upon your experience and your own personal knowledge to help your mentee along. So there are 3 different things which you have to develop the knowledge, or at least be aware of how do you use your knowledge. So these are about the founder themselves, and this is where the founder's emotional intelligence comes in. How do you develop coping mechanisms? So at different stages there will be different type of intervention which will be required from you. So understanding what are those emotional roller coasters and emotional positions which the mentee is going to be in. Then comes the business, and business is that is something you know very well, but you'll also have to guide the mentee, because this may be the first time the mentee is really trying to develop a business. And so there also be some difficult situations. So for example, what happens when the market does not respond to the assumptions which your mentee or the entrepreneur had made. So how do you deal with that? Or how the mentee is struggling to develop a product, or so what is the time to pivot? Is it the time to continue or pivot? So those are the important things which you have to do. Then comes the process. The process is itself very important. And in this particular thing, this is not about the process of your mentoring relationship, but this time the process is all about how they develop the business. So you have to understand that the processes are very important for any business to develop. So you do not want to overburden a business in a very early stage about the process, or you don't want to have very little process, so as the business grows, so people are running around. So there is research shows that there is a direct link between process and the organization. So when you have well-defined process, then you can run the organization with a slightly lesser talent pool. But if you have a very highly talented team, you can get away with lesser processes, but then as the businesses grow, then that becomes a problem. So how do you match the right level of talent with the process? And so what is the time in which you focus more on process, or what is the time when you focus more on talent? So these are the 3 things which we will do on mentoring knowledge. Then comes the stages of the company. So there are 2 broad stages in which the companies will reside. One is early stage company. Early stage companies where the company is trying to develop an idea for the business, and then validating those business ideas. So that is the early stage company. And then the more developed or the growth stage company is where company is actually executing their business plan and the business model. And so this is where execution becomes critical. And this growth stage company, so how you mentor and how you deal with them is very different, because the founder's emotional journey will be very different. They'll be in a very different stage for their journey. Their business will be in a very different place, as well as their process will be in a very different stage. And then comes the time-bound engagement. So there are 3 phases for that engagement. So that is pre-engagement. So that is where you look at what the businesses are doing. So before you get into that, so there will be some self-assessment and mutual assessments. It is not just what you think about yourself and what the mentee is thinking about themselves, what are their needs and what you perceive their needs are. But then there is a mutual matching. So does your experience and talent correspond to the needs, which are perceived needs by the entrepreneurs? And then once you match, then you develop some relationship where you develop mutual trust and develop the way of dealing with each other. And then once you are there, then you can develop a contract. So this is a loose contract. So this, you can think of it more, so we are going to look at very different types of contracting. Some of them may be informal, where you are just supporting them. Or the others may be, it is a compensated contract. So what type of compensation you may expect or get, and those compensations may be adjusted. So as the relationship progresses. So we are going to discuss that. Then you enter the phase of engagement. And in this engagement, so now you are going to come up with a bite size or the chunk of engagement, which, if you may will. So there, what you're going to do is you're going to do need assessments of what the mentor needs in terms of their personal or the founder. These needs are, what are the business needs, what are the process needs. So once you do those assessments, then you plan an engagement. And those plans would have very specific goals, which will have a specific set of activities and specific set of resources which will be attached to that. And then once you agree upon that particular iteration of goals, then what you do is you're going to go on execute. And then as you are executing, then once you are done, then what you do is you get into post engagement. And in the post engagement, what you're looking at, whether you want to continue with engagement, or you want to transform the engagement, or you want to disengage. So continuation means that yes, the way things are working, let's continue with that. Or there may be a situation where you might say, well, let's transform this relationship. So I would like to be on the board, or you may want to be a board of advisor, or you may help in other ways as a consultant, or you can change your relationship from being a mentor to be a little bit more formal relationship. Or you may disengage. So you may both realize that you have achieved what you set out to achieve, and then you may realize that you have given to your mentee what you could have, and now it's time to move on and find some other individuals to mentor. And then you go into capstone course. But before we do that, we are also going to look at and develop these metrics. So these metrics are essentially about, with each of these phases, what we are going to do is we are going to develop different metrics. So these metrics can be, pre-engagement metrics, that how you are going to know that the type of relationship which you are developing, so those are valid. So as you're going through that pre-engagement process, you are going to do that. And then you're also going to develop the monitoring and evaluation of those relationships at each of these phases. So for pre-engagement, engagement, and post-engagement phases. And once we are done with all these phases, then we are going to have a capstone case. And in this capstone case, what we are going to do is to create a scenario. And in the scenario, we'll walk you through all these different aspects from start to finish, and then how do you really execute an engagement. So we are going to go through that. So these are the elements of the framework. So the elements are again mentoring skills, which is related to personal, interpersonal, and organizational and learning. Mentoring relates to founder, business, and processes. Then stages of the company, so which can be early stage or growth stage. Then you have a process of pre-engagement, engagement, and post-engagement. And each of these levels, you are going to develop specific metrics for each of those phases, and then you will develop a monitoring and evaluation plan. And then once you have gone through that, then you are going to get into post-engagement phase, and then so what you're going to do is to do a capstone case analysis is something which we are going to do here together, and then there will be some homework assignment or offline things which you have to do. So how does the course module correspond to this framework? So the first module will be framework and the course overview. That is what we are doing right now. Then in module 2, we are going to talk about the mentoring skills. So we are going to develop some core concepts, core mentoring skills, that are needed. Then we are going to go through mentoring knowledge. So we are going to explore some specifics about what are the key things at different phases or different developmental stages. So what are those core knowledge which you have to practice? And then we are going to develop some way of assessing that what developmental stage the company is in. So whether it is even in early, whether they are in ideation or validation, or they are. So some early stages in each of these things are pretty easy to identify, but sometimes you may have to. There are certain overlaps, and that is where the pivot decision has to be made. So go, no go, or pivot. So we'll develop some concepts to help you identify those. And then we'll get into the pre-engagement phase. In the pre-engagement phase, that will be module 5. And in module 5, we will cover things like early stage companies, so which is ideation and validation, and then growth stage companies. So what are the different aspects, or what are the knowledge components which you have to practice when you are in the stage? And then once you are there, then how do you develop contracts? So some contracts may be very informal, some contracts may be a little bit more formal, because whenever there is compensation involved, then those contracts may be a little bit more involved. Then we'll go into the engagement phase, and in the engagement phase, we are going to look at early stage companies. So what are the things which are required to do that? So we'll develop some specific knowledge elements there. And then also for growth stage companies. And then we are going to, during these two things, we are going to also look at monitoring and evaluation. So how do you develop the metrics, and how do you execute your monitoring and evaluation? So, so one of the things which we would like to work on with you is keeping track of what is going on. And we don't want, this is quite common, and I won't say quite common, but it happens many times that sometimes the relationship just develops very, very beautifully, and it's a win-win situation for all. In some cases, the relationship does not go as well, but it has nothing to do with you, or it has nothing to do with the mentor. So there may be certain stylistic things which just does not match, and that is way of life, and that will happen. But it is better to identify it early on and try to fix it. If you cannot fix it, then what it can be is just move on, and moving on meaning that leave in a friendly terms, rather than having shouting match between mentor and mentee. So there are a lot of, we're going to provide you with some tips how to deal with those situations. And then we'll move on to post-engagement. And in post-engagement, we'll be looking again as what happens in pre-engagement and engagement phase, then how do you assess where you are at, and how do you want to transform, continue transform, or disengage. So we are going to discuss that. So that will be in Module 9. And finally, in Mod 10, what we are going to do is we are going to work on a capstone case, so which will work together. And then later on, so you'll have some offline exercises to do. And finally, so once we are done with that, so there may be some additional opportunity for you to get a Purdue certificate or a Wadhwani certificate or some other university, which may be giving you certain certificates, and those certificates will be each of these entities are going to design some additional assessment. So this is our Wadhwani Purdue framework, and this is how our courses are organized along those framework. So the key thing is we will be covering core mentoring skills, core mentoring knowledge, how do you identify different developmental stages, and then the specific process of engagement. So those will be pre-engagement, engagement, and post-engagement activities. And we'll develop certain metrics and develop a process of monitoring and evaluation. And then, so that will be very helpful when you get into the post-engagement phase. So that is where you assess, take stock, how things are going, and then move on with your relationship. And then finally we'll do a capstone course. So we are excited about it, and thank you, and see you in the next module.